Okay, so we're going to start. For those of that join us, we'll kind of give you an update. For those of you that are joining us on the recording, thank you so much for joining us for SoulFull Sessions Live on Sundays. My name is Jennifer Mackey, and this is...
I'm Todd Mackey. Hi.
You might know him. He's my better half. If you know and you follow my work at all, you know that Todd and I have been working together for years and also had the opportunity of being married for over 20 years. And so this is really fun. This is a new element and wave on the work that we're doing. And so we're just so grateful that folks are able to join us on these Sundays or even whenever you're watching the recording. These conversations in our time are so important. The SoulFullWay is built out of this need to have these value-based, loving, soulful conversations around what's happening in the world, what's happening within us. And this month, we're focusing on values. So we've kind of switched up the format for the months ahead. We pick a theme every month or a value every month. This month is overarching for February. Last week, we talked about global and systemic values. This week, we're talking about values in interpersonal relationships. So relationships with your partners, with your friends, with your family, and in your community and how you contribute. And so we're going to start off today with a quote that I want you to just think about for a moment. I am because we are. This quote is by the Ubuntu people. It's an Ubuntu philosophy from ancient Africa. So it's been around for centuries. But it's about the whole word of this idea of I am because we are. But even the word Ubuntu actually means a person becomes a person through people. And right now in our world, we don't always feel this. We don't always experience this because we're feeling such a disconnect. And we're going to talk about that today and how we really bring it back to these relational realities, how we connect with one another. It matters so much. So this Ubuntu philosophy has been around. It's about governing themselves. It's about resolving conflict. It came around actually during the Truth and Reconciliation talks after apartheid to deal with the aftermath of apartheid. And so Desmond Tutu talked about these ideas. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but every once in a while, you'll see a post on social media of the Ubuntu people. And the one that comes to mind is that there's these beautiful little South African children sitting in a circle. And it's about community when someone's done something wrong or when someone has broken whatever law or value they have, they bring them into the circle and they give them love and they connect with them. And that's what we're talking about today, is how do we create this connection with one another and keep this alive every single day. This idea and this philosophy reminds us how we listen. It reminds us to consider how we disagree, how we include or exclude, and how we repair harm and how we care about one another. The ways we live are important, but it's most important about how we live with one another. And that's what we're talking about today. So we're going to do our sessions begin with a centering exercise to just let go of what was and to become completely centered in this particular moment so we can just gather in. So I'll just ask you to close your eyes and set your feet grounding on the ground. Whatever you've got around you, just let it go for a moment and come into this place of calm and centered. Just close your eyes and get centered. Take some deep breaths. And I just want you to consider for a moment that quote, I am because we are. Notice what stirs inside of you in relationship, not what you think about, setting aside your mind for a moment, but just considering how you feel. I am because we are. And just coming into this present moment, letting go of the morning, just this moment together. And when you're ready, you can just open your eyes, feeling that centered moment of connection. So those of you that are joining us new, welcome to the SoulFull Sessions. I'm Jennifer Mackey. This is Todd Mackey, and we are thrilled to host you for a conversation today about values in relationship. So We're going to talk a little bit about why this conversation matters right now. So, we're all feeling it in our society right now. We're feeling this disconnection, we're feeling this overwhelm, the busyness of things, the distractions that we face with phones and events and people and conversations and opinions. There's so much going on in our world. And that's why these conversations about how we just slow down, come to a place of center, and connect are so important. And the research is pointing to all of this right now, and we're going to get more into this. Todd's going to share some thoughts around this as well too. The World Health Organization identifies loneliness and social isolation as a growing global health concern. And so that's pretty phenomenal, especially since COVID. During COVID, there was so much isolation, people that were on their own and unable to leave their homes and in this state of fear and concern about what was happening. I don't think that actually it was telling us something new. It just brought it to the surface of observation and knowing, because we were both globally connected on the internet and we were isolated in our own social pods to be able to keep ourselves what we thought we needed to do to keep ourselves safe. And now the US Surgeon General has warned that loneliness is an epidemic. And we're feeling that, we've never been more connected. It's been going on for a while, but we've never, in many ways, particularly with all that's going on in the world right now, felt so disconnected in so many ways as well, too. And this research across neuroscience and psychology shows that chronic stress and cognitive overload reduce empathy and patience, and really that capacity for us to be able to deal with more, to have, that connection for more, to be able to deal with what's going on in our lives. This burnout and disengagement is rising across families and workplaces and communities and in all of our relationships. And, this has been going on for quite some time. But as I say, now, for whatever reason, with all that's happening, it's feeling a little more intense. But we're going to talk about this for a moment. So, Todd, maybe you can share about, how you've seen this play out in the world, or how this has been unfolding, an experience that you've had, and, the relation to, I know, a certain favorite author of ours. Feel free to take the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting because I didn't realize how pervasive the themes today were going to be, and
Yeah.
then we started doing the research and starting thinking about it. I went back to some old literature. So I was looking at Kurt Vonnegut. So he wrote in the 70s to I guess in the 90s, he passed away. But he talked particular a couple times about loneliness. And one of the things he talked about was in a book called Slaughterhouse Five. There was a wedding going on, and there were a bunch of people standing around after the wedding, and there was this eclectic group of really different people. And he talked about it being, the community being just people gathered, imperfect and human, not fixed forever, not saved, simply witnessed. And he said everyone in the group was allowed to be odd. So it was just this beautiful community. It wasn't based on a demographic cohort of people between a certain age and a certain place. It was actually a psychographic of people that were eclectic. And I thought that was really interesting that
Yeah, absolutely.
the community based on not what you think it's based on. And then he talked later on, he thought a lot about this, and so Kurt Vonnegut was at a cocktail party in Washington, and he cornered Teddy Kennedy. So Teddy Kennedy was a senator from 1961 till 2009 in Massachusetts, and one of the three original Kennedy brothers. There's four, but one of the Kennedy brothers that was in prominence in politics. And he cornered him, and he talked to him about his next campaign because he was going to run for president. He said, your campaign should be based on the slogan, lonely no more. And he thought the biggest problem in the United States back in the 70s was that people were lonely. It wasn't that they were disaffected. They were hungry. They'd had issues with gas and all kinds of things were going on. But he thought that loneliness was the biggest problem that they should solve for the country, because everything else would come in line once communities became aligned. So I just thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it plays in, those that are watching this that don't know us. Todd and I have worked in Calgary on social capital building campaigns, and just all social capital is, for people that are new. Hi, Susan. There's a few folks joining us. Welcome to the SoulFullWay. Glad to have you here. We're talking about values and community. And so, Todd, that story about Kurt Vonnegut and this Loneliness No More campaign, as you and I know in doing this work in social capital building. So social capital is that fabric that pulls us together. And so the studies that they've done say that when that social capital is really strong, it's really high, then people are more engaged with one another. They consider in one another more. And so think about it like in a small town where you know your neighbor, and your grandma might be crossing the street. You'll slow down, you'll care, you'll pay attention. You won't cut people off in traffic because that could be the person that you have coffee with on Sundays. So when there's that social fabric that's really strong and it's together, then there's a consideration of people, and that leads to higher economic connection and strength. That leads to social relationships. That leads to a decrease in mental health issues. So that social fabric is really important. So Todd and I worked on these social capital building campaigns, and we started something called Success, which was about being synchronistic in community. And that would naturally lead to success. You didn't have to pitch yourself. I come from the PR world, and I didn't love that, handing out your business cards. It's really about coming to know one another. And really, this work was spurred by some work that I did with a client in Calgary, and he did lots of social capital building. And that was based on really Robert Putnam's work, which he wrote Bowling Alone. And it was a book written about America and the fact that bowling is this pastime that is a favorite pastime, and people were bowling alone. And so this has been going on for a while, but we're feeling more and more of it now. And so this is why these conversations are so important, and we can do something about it. You and I saw, Todd, that when we were doing those Success meetings every week, people would come, they would share, they would have a little opportunity to share who they were going around the circle. Then we would bring in speakers that would talk about the strength of community, whether that was a new business that moved in, a nonprofit that had opened up. We had, the head of the Calgary Zoo come in, talk about, what they were doing as far as these, the initiatives with animals and breeding. And so it was anything that would bring our community back together again. We live in White Rock, just outside of White Rock, but White Rock's kind of our heart and soul. And Gail is very much, and she and her husband, Dave, are very much involved in the community. And so we see this in small towns, but we need to find a way to ripple that out into the world. And that's why we're having these particular conversations to say, we see the disconnect, we see the busy, we see that our capacity is overloaded. So we need to take a step back, take a breath, and come back to a way of thinking that we can influence our relationships, even in a small capacity. And sometimes that can turn into large initiatives that really can change the narrative and what's going on. And these conversations at the Soulful Way are really important because there are so many conversations going on about the reality of what is happening in the world right now. And it is important to have those conversations. But sometimes those conversations, and we were talking about it a lot last week, can leave all of us, but particularly the younger generation, feeling as though there isn't hope, as though they can't do anything about it. All these things are happening with the planet, with politics, with our governance, and in the world. And so if we don't get back to thinking about and talking about these important, positive, forward thinking, what can I do about it conversations, then we can't change it, or we feel that loss of hope. Anything else to add on that, Todd,
No,
about, that?
there, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking today about, values because they help us discern what actually matters in your season of life. Whatever that season is, the season of life for values selection and conscious connection is different for our kids as teenagers than it is for Todd and I at this stage of what we call our second act. Our kids are now launched. So whatever your act is in life, it's important to consider what the values are in your life now, because they're very different throughout the course of our life. The work that I do in coaching with my clients, they get a coaching manual when I work with them, usually, and we're aligning those values and that values action alignment on the personal and the professional level. And so it's a constant regrouping. That manual that they receive, it lasts forever because you can go back to it and fill it out again and consider again, because it changes from the time you're, starting a family and getting pregnant or starting a new job or entering into university to when you're now in this stage of community contribution, retirement, whatever your second act is. And so it's important to revisit this again and again, consciously and creatively together, to consider these relationships. And so what we want to look at today is what is working. So last week we did it on a global system. We took a look at we looked at the systems that are breaking down in our world and shifting and changing, recognizing that, as Mark Carney says, nostalgia is not a strategy. So looking forward at the countries that are doing things really well. This week, we're looking at who's doing it well in community. And so I'm going to switch it up a little bit, Todd. I want you to talk about this punk movement first. I want you to talk about this first, because I've been talking a lot, and I want your beautiful thoughts in the mix, love.
Thank you. So back in the 70s, there was the predominant movement was disco, and in the UK it was glam rock, and so there was this style of music that was really beautiful, but really wasn't that soulful at all. The glam rock was a bit better, but the reaction to that is a pendulum in music. So out of that came the beginnings of the punk movement, and the punk movement started off as a very angry, an angry. Actually, it started off in the UK. There was a designer called Vivienne Westwood, and she designed the punk fashion. She designed the leather and the chains and those clips and whatever. And the problem was there wasn't any punk music going on there yet. So her husband was Malcolm McLaren. He decided, okay, well, let's get this going. So he put together a group of young men from England, and they called them the Sex Pistols. And so they were actually fashion driver for the world. So it didn't start with the best footings, but it was interesting because what it did was it spoke to the disaffected. It spoke to people that were angry with what was going on. There's a lot to be angry in the 70s. One of my favorite things about that period is that it was honest, and it was a folk movement. It came out of nowhere, like the punk music came out. So it kind of went along, and then about 1979, The Clash released my favorite album of all time is London Calling, and actually Mark Carney is also apparently. And there's
I'm not too, yeah. I think our whole family's now at this point.
I think that we're all devotees. There's a song on it called "Lost in the Supermarket," and it was a bit of a departure from the punk style because it became introspective and it became honest and really in the footing for the way the punk and the ska movement just right after that sort of evolved. And there's it's hard to capture the Lost in the Supermarket, but it's about a young man in an apartment with no money and being sad.
Yeah.
And there's one of the verses, "I wasn't born so much as I fell out. Nobody seemed to notice me. We had a hedge back home in the suburbs over which I could not see." So it was a really interesting and a huge jump, sort of in a literary sense, in terms of the style of the music. And what this brought out, the original punk movement brought in all the people that were angry about everything. So it was kind of violent. It was, it was a rough place to be if you went to one of those concerts. With this song, with this music, with music from other people in this era, it became a community that was different than it was originally intended. It wasn't as I said, a demographic group of kids between 18 and 20.
No.
It was a group of people that were interested in bigger things.
Eclectic, hey?
Eclectic, yeah.
Yeah.
In the
And
Scout,
some misfits along the way. We love those people. We are them.
I'll include myself for sure as one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So in the mid 80s, I played in a ska band, with a band called Swinging Neckties. So it was just a fun band, but it was all fun, high energy music. And I was thinking back the other day, and there's we were quite successful. We sold out when we played. It was a big deal. We didn't play that much, but it was successful. I was thinking about the people that were there, and I thought, well, this is an eclectic group because one of them was she's now the head of president of Hockey Canada. One of the guys is a guy called Ian Hodgkinson, who became El Vampiro, which was a famous Mexican wrestler, if you can believe it. And one of the guys was a bouncer for us, actually won 2 medals in the Olympics in cycling. And one of the guys was hanging around there. I sort of knew him, didn't really know him that well, is Jim Rapino, who actually founded Live Nation. So this is an eclectic group of people.
Who knew? And that was where? That was in what city?
Thunder Bay. Yeah.
Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. Like, who knew when all those, those young people are hanging out, you could never have known, but that's what it attracted, was that, on the edge, edgy, looking for a better life kind of people, right?
And actually the people with curious minds, I think, really, too.
Yeah.
Different because back in those days and at that era, I remember talking to a guy called Larry LeBlanc. He was the editor for Billboard magazine.
Yeah.
And I was telling him I played in this band. He said, "Oh, that must have been really interesting because back in Thunder Bay in that era, it was all big hair bands. So it was all heavy metal bands."
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
like 20 heavy metal bands, and we're doing this ska, reggae, punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. We weren't the first punk band, but we were the second. So,
That's all.
but
And yesterday was Clash Day. So people were playing the music of the Clash and remembering that. Okay, so now I want you to talk about what this has meant for our kids because we had this conversation, the last couple of days. So what has this meant for our kids now? How has this trickled down?
right. It's interesting because we think that the older you get, you kind of get set in a music style and you listen to it. So you may not even
Mhm.
be considering that punk is still a thing, but it actually is quite a movement that's still current. And our boys who are both under 20, they go to these punk concerts in Vancouver, and there's an underground movement.
Yeah,
And as you go in there, and there's guys with they're like the traditional punk with the mohawks, and
yeah.
it's hardcore, right? And then just regular people.
And
But
they're underage. Like you can go. There are underage places where it's all ages. There are some that are for 19 above, drinking age. But it's amazing because they're down there, on a Thursday night or a Friday night. Yeah, you go ahead. I
sometimes
thought, yeah,
it's somebody's basement, so it's a real grassroots
yeah,
thing. But it
yeah,
is a community, and it's a community of people, and when we talk to the boys, they go, "You know what? The people there are lovely. You can talk to
it's,
everybody. Nobody's pretentious. There's no goofballs. Nobody's doing stupid stuff. They're just there because they love the music." So
yeah,
it created this community based on the fact that, the music is interesting. It speaks to them in a certain way, and it's really cool to
yeah.
see that continuing on.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, those of you that are a little older that are watching this, they said we can come too. So they said, there's people of all ages. So we actually, it's on our list. It's on our yes list of things to do. So we're going to head down because they said there are people like there's some groups and now they've gotten to know them because Liam is older. So he's been going a lot more, but he said now he's gotten to know them. He knows the different areas. And he said some are, a bit more raunchy. Some are like really it's about community. So now we know the ones to bring you to, but like finding these, oh, I love your little heart scale, finding these places where this plays out, where this continues. So, you know, the first time I experienced this whole idea that kind of struck me as being possible that community was more connected. I grew up in a small town, and Thunder Bay was like that too, right? We grew up in these small towns, but I didn't see a culture like when I moved to Toronto. I didn't see it. Cities people are a little more guarded, and so I saw this disconnect, but way back in my 20s, in my mid 20s to late 20s, when I actually went to Austria for the first time, I was 29 and I was just experiencing Europe for the first time. I actually wrote about it in the SoulFullWay newsletter. I told a story about arriving there one of my first days in Austria in the Nockberg Mountains when we were driving from Carinthia, which is in southern Austria, and we were driving to Salzburg. And we stopped at this little, it was actually a gas station with a little coffee shop. And here in North America, you wouldn't necessarily stop for coffee at a coffee shop or a coffee shop at a gas station. You would find a quaint place, but this place was adorable. Everything is, I always say, Europe is all about the details. So you walk in and it's this cute little place and the mountains are looming, by this gas station. And we walk in and we open the door and there's about 20 or 30 people in this room. And as we come through the door, there's like a hum of sound that you can hear that everybody's talking with their families and they're in their at their separate tables, and we walk through the door and all of a sudden everybody turns, stops what they're doing, stops their conversations, turns around and says Fiati, Fiati as we're walking through the door. And my friend that I was with, that was like my friend and my Austrian guide, he's from Austria, lives there, he, said Fiati, and we sat down at the table. And I thought, wow, like my friend must come here a lot. Like these people must know him. This is incredible. Like every person stopped and said hello. And then we were sitting having lunch, and the family next to us got up to leave. And as they were kind of heading through the door, everybody stopped what they were doing again and said Fiati and back and forth. You can hear the Fiatis through the whole restaurant. Not a single person in the restaurant did not say it. And this happened every time someone got either walked in the door to come in and join us or walked out. And so finally I turned to my friend and I said, "Okay, what is this? Like you obviously don't know all these people that are coming and going." And he laughed and he said, "No, of course I don't." He goes, "That's just our way." And I said, what do you mean it's your way? And he said, in our culture, you just stop and you acknowledge. It doesn't matter whether you know them or not. It's a humanity thing. It's like we connect. And as we walked, so I was blown away and I'd never seen that. Even in my small town, you might know someone sitting at a table, but it wasn't a cultural movement. And it's not even like they plan it or they talk about it. That's the way of their world, is being connected, of having that value, of noticing one another, of pausing, of being connected. And the other thing was, when we walked along the trails, it didn't matter if you were at the top of a mountain or you were walking a little village trail, every person that you passed would say Gruskot. And Gruskat means, may the grace of God be with you, or God be with you, or God greets you. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or not. This is about acknowledging. It's almost like that expression of namaste. The oneness of me, the connection in me, that oneness in me acknowledges the oneness in you, and in that we are one. And so these cultural movements, these cultural snippets of beauty that are that connection of values, is so important to recognize that is out there and to keep them alive in our community. And so, Todd, yeah, go ahead.
Particular just to Austria? Was it
Sorry.
just was this particular just to Austria, or was it to other?
I think in general, it was in Austria. It was all through this area. So it was all through. So, we were in Vienna, we were in Salzburg, we were in Bad which is like a tiny village. And so it was different villages. I did notice it because I traveled all through Europe. I lived in Austria for, quite a while. And I did notice it in other cultures, certainly, but every culture was different. And so that's a great question that you asked. I noticed a few more people joining us. Welcome to the Soulful Way. We're talking about values in community and how we can recognize what's working and how we can bring more of that into our lives. I'm Jennifer Mackey, and this is Todd Mackey. Welcome. So I noticed it all throughout Europe. It's a really important point to make. Certainly more in Europe than here, even in quite large cities. Not so much in London, although when you're in the tourist areas, yes. In Italy, absolutely. Um, Warm people, love to hug, notice you. If they think something is beautiful, whether that is a person or it's a flower or it's a mountain, they will tell you. That's the passion of the Italian people. They're so passionate. They love to connect. They love to be warm, ciao bella. It's all about like, you're beautiful. And they notice that and they recognize it and they share it very easily. In Brussels, where I spent time, the very first night we arrived, we jokingly, I was single then, but we called it, my girlfriends and I used to sing the song, It's Raining Men, because in Brussels, when you arrive, and this is in a touristy area, but I got two marriage, like engagement proposals and wedding proposals in the first day I was there, and the first night I was there, even though these men were married, but it was like, there was such love. There was such an appreciation. There was just a warmth. And so in these small towns or even in these touristy towns, particularly in Europe, this is so alive. You notice one another. Sometimes your livelihood depends on that because in Brussels, particularly, they're inviting you into their restaurants. So they want you to notice, right? They want you to be a part of that. Now, when you travel all the way to where you and I lived for a while, just outside of, Banff, Alberta. So we lived in Canmore, but when we were in Banff, if you remember, they did not love the tourists. Like at all, right? So it's so different in different cultures, but we have to notice where it's working and see the wealth and the richness of life in that. And so, I think that noticing these places. So, Todd, are there other places kind of you've traveled that you've seen this or experienced this?
Just a general feel. I haven't traveled extensively. I noticed when I was in China, you'd walk
Yeah.
around. I hadn't expected it, but there's a general warmth. There,
Mhm.
people were smiling at me, and they were, and it's Beijing, one of the biggest cities in the world, and we went to some other cities outside there. But
Wow.
I expected it to be cosmopolitan, but I didn't expect
Yeah.
it to be as warm as it was. So it was just a general feel.
Yeah.
And then Ireland, I remember standing by the side of the road, and I'd gone by myself, and this Irish man who was probably in his 60s, he was like 5'5", and he's kind of standing there in the corner, and
Yeah.
he starts talking to me as if I'm Irish. Um, openness, and he was talking. He was actually complaining about the tourist in Dublin too. So didn't realize he was actually talking to a tourist. And I said, "But I have Irish descent." But it was a general feeling of community there. There was a community feeling in these
Yeah.
places.
And we just have to keep this alive. Like, we have to find ways to keep this alive now in our world. There is, as we were talking about last week, there's just a feeling, a general feeling, this idea of, I've always found it such a bizarre term. And I actually, even though I'm a person that works in communication, so of course I'm online quite a bit, um, this idea of doom scrolling, like what a horrible word we have, like what a horrible phrase we have in our world, that we can doom scroll, like all the things that are wrong with the world. But there are these pockets of places where it is happening. Even in Guatemala, when I was there, I did a couple of trips there. One with our son Liam, and then I ran a retreat there in November. And what I noticed about the Guatemalan people, it's a third world country, and there are so many people suffering. But when you wander into a village, and at one point we kind of walked into this area, one of the stories that kind of struck me, I was staying at a little retreat place at a woman's house. We took a little boat across, and we had to get through. We used this property because they had a little taxi that would stay at this property that they were allowed to keep there, that was along the waterfront. And so we got out of the boat and we walked onto this person's property. And it is literally like a 12 by 12 tin roof shack. And there are 6 people living there. And a woman walks out with a little baby, and there's a grandmother and grandfather, and the kids are running around. And so as we walk up, I look very different than the world, because we're in the back area of Guatemala. We're in the backwoods of Guatemala, if you will. So there's not a lot of people that look like me in that area. And as I walk up, you can see the women particularly, but the men too. And they're looking at you, and they're assessing who you are. And then the moment that you smile, and I've lived a few places in the world, and I don't see this very often. As soon as I would smile, they instantly just melted, and they would just smile like you were their best friend, and they would hug you and say hello. And these people who had very little, then my friend was translating in the dialect, but she was translating, and they actually said, "I want you to pick a chicken because we're going to make you soup for you tonight. So you pick a chicken and we will make the soup for you. And when you get home tonight, we will walk the soup over to your home as a way to just share." And so these people have nothing, and yet they have everything. And that's what we're trying to keep alive in these conversations in this world, right, Todd? So it's amazing. But I do think that, it's important to have these conversations, to keep it alive, to talk about the places where it is working, and see the ways in which we can bring this to our own world, not just in person, but also online, to be able to spread more of this, to talk about how we can make this happen. That's why we're doing this month. We're talking about global and systemic values last week. This week is interpersonal relationships. Next week, we deal with the foundation of the core values that we hold individually, how we cultivate those. And then it's all working towards a workshop at the end of February, where it's interactive, where we can really do some of this work. Even though we're online, we can be together and we can have these important conversations, as opposed to just Todd and I talking to you. We want to be able to hear from you. That's really what the goal of all this is, and to build this over this next while. So we appreciate you watching and being here today, whether you're live with us or you're watching this recording. It's important. I appreciate that you're taking your time to be with us. And we just want to keep this movement going. Just keep this movement going. So we're going to shift now to kind of this university, how this plays out in universities, where we're going with education, how important this is that we're having these conversations at that educational level when young people are moving into the world. And then we're talking about it as far as business as well too. So just a couple little snippets for me that you and I were sharing when I got into university, and that's just a few years ago. Um, I had a professor who was quite edgy, Peter Naus, and he taught aging, dying, death, and human sexuality. And two of the things that he did that were quite remarkable at that time in the 90s was he brought on in our human sexuality class, he brought on a panel from Glow, and that was the gay and lesbian organization of Waterloo, and University of Waterloo in Kitchener, Waterloo, Ontario is where I went to university. And so he brought on this panel, and he brought these people to the front, and we talked about there was one football guy, or I don't remember all of them because it was a few years ago, but there was one gentleman he was on the football team, and he was gay, and he was dating an engineer, which he came up to his shoulder. So it was just even the juxtaposition and the humor with which they did it and how they talked about, they just opened the floor to the conversation at a time when these conversations weren't happening. And it was so essential, and opened the floor to conversation, asking questions. The audience could ask questions about how it felt to be a football player. How did you deal with that? How have you, in coming out, what was that like for you? These conversations, I saw that emerging in university. And now our kids are so aware of people's pronouns, of their identity, of how that shifts over time. It's just so important that we're even valuing people on that level now to be able to accept that. Anything you want to add on that, Todd, about what you've noticed, in that area with our kids or otherwise?
Not particularly. I know that this is it's all goes back to the community idea about how we're getting along and how we're working together. So.
Yeah, and we're really connecting with one another on that level. The other, thing with Peter Naus, one of my professors, he talked about, and I've shared this story. If you've been following us for the last 6 weeks, I've shared this story before, so I'll make it brief, but still try to get the point, the soulful point across. But Peter Naus was this guy that he always brought these interesting topics to the floor, which is what we're trying to do through the Soulful Way. And he brought this, topic to the floor one day, and he said, "Okay, so today we're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about canned peaches." And we were like, "Okay, Peter, where are we going to go with this?" And he said, "I've been married for about 30 years, and the first 10 years of my marriage with my wife, every time I got sick, she would get me chicken soup, and I would eat it." And she would do it out of the kindness of her heart and try to help me feel better and make me feel nourished. And then after about 10 years in our marriage, we were at a family reunion, family party, and she and my mother struck up a conversation that turned to, for in whatever way, to the fact that, what does Peter really love that makes him feel better when he's sick? And my mother happened to let it slip that it was really chilled canned peaches. That, when he was little, when he just wasn't feeling well, we would, chill the peaches and put it in a, bowl with a spoon, and he would feel like he was getting better, and he would, feel loved up. And so Peter now said, my wife came to me and said, "Peter, we've been married for all these years. And so why in the world have you not told me that, do you even like chicken soup?" And he said, "No, not particularly." And she said, "But you've been eating it even when you're sick." And he said, "Yeah, but it made you feel better. And so I ate it because I love you." And she said, "Well, from now on, I'll be giving you chilled peaches because I love you." And he said, "So let's consider for a moment what the world would look like if instead of reflecting onto others what we love, we actually took the time to listen to what they love, what they value. How different would our relationships be?" And so this idea of caring enough to understand and to, you love that story. Me too, Gail. I really do feel as though there's always an opportunity there to love one another better. And that's what we're, trying to talk about today and engage in today is, how do we love one another better? How do we deliver those canned peaches? And so I took both those experiences into my little toolbox of life, of soulful life. And then when I got into a work experience with Easter Seals of Ontario, when I was running, they asked me to run their camp, first of all. And when I ran the camp, they said, "We're not hiring you because you understand how camps run. You've not been a camp director. You've not come up the ranks of the camping world, but we're hiring you because we need leadership. And we need leadership because the people that have been working at the camp before have not been following the rule book. And we need you to get people to follow the rules in our corporate rule book." And so when I took on this role, I thought, I don't love rules. I actually tend to live outside the rules. Not all rules, but some rules. And I thought, how do I reach these young people? And so I thought about those canned peaches. I thought about those values that was starting to stir in me in my 20s in the work that I was doing. And so when I got there, I just pulled out a flip chart during our pre-camp week with all the staff. I'd hired 75 staff from across the country and also, from the UK. And I just pulled out the flip chart and I said, let's talk about what we care about. Let's talk about what we value. And from there, when we made this big long list of what people valued, keeping the kids safe, the kids coming home at the end of camp and feeling excited about that, telling their parents how much they loved it, wanting to come back next year. We want to have camaraderie. We want to keep our health up because we have to give personal care to these children. So we need to care about our personal care and our balance between spending time with the kids and having quiet time or having fun time for us. So through this whole list of what we valued, came the guidelines. And at the end of the day, you might imagine where this is going. Every single rule in the rule book was covered with the guidelines, but now there was buy-in. Now they knew why they had to have a curfew. Now they knew why they shouldn't wake a child up at 12 o'clock and take them out into the woods to scare the bejeebus out of them, right? Like they understood what was going on. And so taking these lessons that we learn about values and bringing them into the workplace and how we do our work, we need to get creative and be thinking about this and have this top of mind all the time so that it's shaping not only our relationships and community, but it's shaping the work that we do or how we serve or how we show up in the workplace or how we show up with our families. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Todd, to talk about how this played out in a very important experience in your life and your
Yeah,
leadership.
it's really interesting when you want to talk about business a little bit. So, what I've done in my career a lot of times has been managing companies that needed to be improved. So it's a challenging kind of an area to go into, and the traditional wisdom says you go in and you look at the books, you look at the staffing levels, you look at the productivity, you look at how things are set up, and that's one way to do it, and it works. But I've taken a different approach. So in marketing, there's a term called marketing myopia, and really, what it is it's marketing. When you're marketing, you're creating something. You want to create something where there's a demand, not because you think there's a demand. The famous line was, you don't buy a drill because you want a drill. You buy a drill because you want a hole. So are you really servicing, are you actually looking at what's going on in the company? So, I have an example of one company I went into. It was a private college. I was a director. It was in fairly bad state. It was, they were talking about closing it down or doing something with it. Um, they had just, voted to unionize, which is not really that common in the private education sector. The staff was happy, or it was staff was unhappy, the
Yeah.
students were unhappy, the sales team was unhappy, and it was just generally a negative kind of a place to be. So conventional wisdom says you go in, you got 100 days to figure out what's going on and implement a plan. But in reality, in these types of situations, you got about 30 days. So I walked around and I talked to people. I looked at what they were doing. And the first thing that was substantive that I did was I implemented a policy for all the staff to recognize anybody that walks past them. So if a student walks by you, you say, good morning, good afternoon, how are you, hi, something. And I said, if you don't do that, and I see you not doing that, we're going to have a conversation because this is important. We need to make the students feel welcome.
Mhm.
And what I worked on with the staff and with the students was basically creating community. It wasn't talking about creating community, but we were talking about communication. And so from a practical point of view, taking the values and then making the values work is something that's not really done that much. But
No.
what we did was create a mission statement that said we are a socially responsible community of learners that communicates with respect. So within that little little snippet, it talks about social responsible. So all of a sudden, the first thing is it's important for us to make sure that we're all taking care. We are a community. We had food drives, we had clothing drives, we had stuff, we had anything we did that was like a fun thing had a benefit to the students.
Yeah.
So social responsible community of learners. All of a sudden, okay, we're here to learn, and and I said that we're here to teach. You're here to learn. You're here to teach us. You're here to talk to us. We're creating a community. This isn't just a lecture based program or programs.
Mhm.
And then we communicate with respect is that I said, because I taught in community college for about 5 years also,
Yeah.
your job as a student is to challenge me. Your job is to say, when I think something's wrong, I think this is wrong. I think this is, I don't understand that, or that doesn't make sense to me, or why would that be the case?
Yeah.
If you communicate that to me with respect, all of a sudden you've got a open conversation going on. If you come in and start yelling at me and say you're full of whatever,
Yeah.
can't, there's no communication going on. So these
Yeah.
three things pulled together created
Mhm.
a better vibe. And after about um, 4 or 5 months, people kind of walking through and said, "Hey, it's a good homey feeling here now."
Yeah.
What had happened was the students were reacting because the faculty was talking to them. And I was talking to the faculty about not being like, there tends to be sometimes bully type behavior by professors
Mm.
because they're in a position of power and they're just tired, whatever.
Mm.
We made that not an acceptable situation. So
Yeah.
the students were feeling better. The staff was feeling better. We had an open, we literally, the woman that was there before me had the campus director's office was full of boxes. So you couldn't even sit down. One of the first things they did is took all the stuff out and put it in the closet. And then all of a sudden there was space for people to come in and sit down.
Yeah.
And so it
And
changed.
then what happened with the union?
So wasn't an intended outcome, but it was 9 months after I started. They voted to decertify from the union, and I
Mhm.
think unions are important. I think that I had
Yeah.
no problem with the union. It wasn't an intention. It wasn't us
No.
trying to break the union,
No.
but they decided on their own that okay, things are okay now. Like we don't need to have someone protecting us from me in this case. We turned the thing around,
Mhm.
and so by the end of
Beautiful.
the year, we had turned the entire campus around, and we ended up being the second most profitable, which isn't that's not the goal, but
Mhm.
it was a well-run campus, and our compliance was the best compliance in the
But it
city.
is the goal to the leaders that be, right?
Yeah.
It is, and that's usually like what comes of that. You build from the foundation up. When you create those values, you created that culture of connection, then people feel it and then the money flows that's so true. Like that's a metaphor for our lives. When we build it from a place of value and quality and connection and soul, then what comes is so beautiful. And beautifully so, it ends in abundance.
Yeah, and image able to be able to communicate. I'll just tell you one quick story.
Yeah, please.
One of the issues when you've got the staff, there was about 350 students, there was about 50 staff members, and there's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces with all
Mhm.
that. Basically, your consumers are in your face all the time. So we set up a thing in my office. I put a whiteboard up and I set a section across of two boxes. And I said, okay, now on a day to day basis, when you have something you need to talk to me about, you can't necessarily get me to talk. I don't have the time to talk to you at that moment. Come into my office, walk in, write on the board the note of what you want to talk about. Put it in two categories. This needs to be done right away, or this needs to be worked on, this future thing.
Beautiful.
And so everybody was able to come in and put their notes on, and then it actually organized us in the morning. I love Richard Branson says use the most comfortable technology. Well, the whiteboard was the best technology to use.
Yeah.
People come in, write their thing on, and we'd have the morning meeting. They would be quick,
Yeah.
the what's next concept from West Wing, and we
Yeah.
very quickly. And if we couldn't solve it, we put it as a for the
Yeah.
next a day to see if there's something else that needed to be done. But
Yeah.
everybody was able to be heard. Everybody was able to solve their problems, and they were to move on quickly. Nothing worse than having a boss where you ask them a question and they just don't make a decision, and
Yeah.
it's 4 days. You have to ask them again and again and again. You're
Mm.
unproductive. You're frustrated. So taking these things out of the way, making it easier for them to be successful. I always said, I want to get to the point where you guys are working so hard and doing so well that I can take Fridays off and go golfing. I'm half joking, but if
Yeah.
people that are motivated, people that are happy, are getting
Yeah.
their jobs done on a regular basis, and then it moves
Absolutely.
sorry, it's very technical, from strategic to from tactical to strategic. So a good
Yeah.
man spends um, probably 70% of the time in tactical and 30% strategic. Bad managers spend 100% of the time in tactical, just solving problems.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the goal of that.
Yeah. That's reactive versus proactive, which
That's
this whole idea of building foundations, right?
but my point is the
Yeah.
whole strategy that I used there was to set up values that we could always turn to, and you could say, yeah, we're doing this because of this. We're doing this because of this.
Yeah. Absolutely. The same. Yeah. With Easter seals. And you and I brought that into our children as
Yes.
well, too. Like we talked about canned peaches with our kids. What do you love? What makes you feel appreciated? What makes you feel good? And then we built our Mackie mantra. We're a family devoted to love and joy and compassion for others. We act in kind and respectful ways that honor one another's divine essence and guide each other home to peace. And so we didn't have to have rules for our kids. We had values. And so you were either in alignment with that or you were out of alignment with that. And it was just about getting back in alignment with that, not just for the harmony of our family, but for the harmony in your own soul. So I think that's a good segue. So we're going to move into um this personal relationships. So now we're going to talk about kind of how that plays out as a partner, as a parent, in relationships with friends. And so this idea of values when it comes to knowing the people that we love or caring enough in this environment to ask, what do you need? So when I was thinking about this section, I was thinking that,
Sorry, I just need to step away for a second, Jen. I'll be right back.
sure, honey. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what this whole element is with regard to just a sense of peace. So when we talk about our relationships with people, oftentimes we know, if we really think about it, we actually know what someone cares about. We know what their canned peach is. We know what's important to them. And if we don't know, then we need to ask. It's that idea that we have to care enough to be able to ask instead of just reflecting onto them. That idea of, chicken soup. We want to bring in the canned peach. And so we have to ask sometimes. And sometimes in situations with family, we can't even ask. When our children were young, they didn't know enough to be able to communicate that or to be able to share that. And so we need to sometimes be able to anticipate, to be able to read the signs, if you will. And when that happens, then we need to take that next step where we actually go into this soulful place. And that's why we talk about this. We're not just talking about business as a business strategy. We're talking about, and relationships as a strategy. We're talking about the soulful element of everything. How do we bring this back to this intangible, but this beautiful knowing and trusting our own wisdom within? And so when we don't know or we can't have that person communicate, we need to be able to come back to this place of soulful centering. Welcome back. We need to come back to this soulful centering. And then we need to ask ourselves, what is it this person needs? What is it that my loved one needs? What is it that this friend needs right now? And care enough about that, about them to be able to ask that question. And just examples in our own life, with our children. Liam was, very quiet as a young boy. We called him Winnie the Pooh because he was always in his thoughtful spot. He was always reading his books. He was always very calm. And we called him like Buddha baby when he was born because he was very chill. And then we have the second baby, and Nathaniel is Tigger. You just hold your fingers out and he's bouncy, 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 bouncy all the time, full of energy, brought so much joy. He's our little joy boy and our little Zen boy. Very different. So when they were little, we had to anticipate. So those of you that are parents or grandparents, or even this is very typical and true even with our friends, that we have to sometimes anticipate and read a person's energy and what they need in that particular moment. And so when Liam was little, I would say to him, if you need a break, if you need some quiet, you just ask me and I will play with your little brother. And with Nathaniel, he needed lots of cuddles and he needed to be around us. And so he slept with us overnight lots of times. Whenever he wanted to sleep over, he could have one when he was little. And then it was about how do we get your energy out? So when I was teaching and facilitating through homeschool, what we called life school, Liam would sit and read the book and Nathaniel would be learning and doing round-offs the whole time. And so understanding and anticipating those needs are so important in the relationships that we have, that we can see that. So when we can ask, ask. And when we can't, go within and ask within and see what comes. And so, Todd, you and I now, maybe we can talk a little bit about you and I when we met and how this evolves. But when we met, maybe you can talk a little bit about what was important to you, what you valued at that stage when you met me, and maybe why this launched the you and me of over 20 years.
I think timing is everything. We've talked
Yeah.
about before. I think if we had met at a different point in our lives, we might not have clicked or connected. And I think
Yeah.
that we connected at the exact right time. I had been working in a company that was quite stressful, and I just decided I can't work for these people anymore. And I took some time off, and I traveled a little bit. I went to Ireland, and I just was sort of
Yeah.
finding myself at my late 30s. And, but it was really important for me to find a less stressful life, something that was more balanced, something that I could actually survive because
Yeah.
I tended
Yeah.
to internalize quite a bit, and I still do a little bit, but I needed to manage the stress, and part of it was figuring out a different way to approach life. And I think that you and I met, Jen, at a time when you were going through similar things, not exactly, but on a sort of a
Mhm.
parallel path of, okay, what's the, what's the secret to life? It's not
Mhm.
42. It's more complicated than that. And Douglas Adams would agree. But I think that
Yeah.
there's what's the meaning of life? Like, why are we here?
Yeah. And I do. I really admired that in you. So I think that, the timing coming together, but we were really clear about what our values were. You really wanted more balance. I wanted someone that was adventurous, that wanted to say yes, not to me. I don't need you to say yes. As you know, we have different opinions and I love that. It makes life rich. But the same values of yes to life, yes to the experience. Let's just live our lives to the fullest. Let's grow, let's spiritually grow. Those things were important to me, and you were so at that
You were
stage. So,
you were a
yeah.
closet punk.
What?
You were a closet punk.
I was.
Didn't even know it.
I didn't know I needed a punk guy in my life, and now I have 3 of them.
Yeah.
But that is like living on that edge and wanting to just, get the most out of life. So, in choosing partners and choosing friendships, and it's interesting that sometimes we don't realize that our friends maybe don't align with that. That sometimes we can have friends because of proximity. And we talk about this lots with the boys now that they're out in the world. When you're growing up and you're in high school or you live in a small town, you have friends by proximity. And then when you get out in the world or you travel or you go wherever, you have friends by energetic attraction. So now you're attracting people into your life. But this is constantly evolving. And so even with you and I, Todd, after 20 years, and this sparked, and this work that we're doing together now sparked another level of this, because this idea of reflecting on your values, as we said, different for different seasons, is really powerful. And so you and I were walking on the pier in our beautiful White Rock, and we were talking about what are our values now. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, what our values are now. So we talked about creativity. We talked about the fact that being creative in the world matters, that evolving in creativity. So, you for music, Todd, me for writing, and, pulling together community projects like this are really important, that we're on the same page and we're growing in that. We talked about critical thinking being really important, both from the analytical perspective, and you're going to talk about this in a sec, and then from me, the soulful perspective. So, that finding that balance between critical thinking and soulful thinking. And then for us at this season of life as well too is about family, about you and I as a new type of family, going back to like when we were engaged, because now our boys have, they're launching on their own. And also whenever the boys are around with us, being very clear about the fact that we want more play and we want more adventure in our life. These are conscious choices. If not, we become complacent, we become comfortable, when we stop growing, because as we get older, we get a little tired. We get into this calm place and we're not stretching, but then we feel an emptiness creeping in. And it's important for our neuroplasticity, our joy, our vitality at the end of life, that at these, not end of life, but at this next stage of life, that we're constantly growing, constantly stretching. And in the antithesis of that, stilling, quieting, finding that balance. So maybe talk a little bit about critical thinking and why that's been important for you, why it's important for us. You've got some thoughts on that, I know.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were doing research, and I was literally going down a rabbit hole on values, and I got this thing I was going to talk about Isaac Asimov's third law of robotics, and I was going to get science fiction thing. Then I realized, hey, let's bring it back. Jen said maybe that's a little bit farther than we want to go with that, but it goes back to the critical thinking thing, and
Yeah.
I that um, one of the reasons I think it's so important for people to go to university, and some of the literature now is sort of supporting that, is that you can't go to university now and expect to get a job that pays good money. If that's the reason you're going, you're probably going down the wrong rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And what I think really that the importance of university is that you go and you learn critical thinking. And so what do we mean by critical thinking? My undergrad degree was in history, and I had my favorite professor of all time was a guy called Vic Smith. He was from Scotland. He had a huge, very big Scottish accent, very not a big man, really interesting. And we would talk about a concept in the lectures, and he would say, always remember to consider the source. And so what does consider the source mean? That was probably the most influential thing I learned in university was when you look at what somebody says, you consider the source. So is that someone that's got a bias against something or for something? Is that someone that was writing in a time when this is what was influencing what they could say because the church? So there's a lot of things you have to
Yeah.
consider trying to evaluate the effectiveness of a source or how you use it when you write. And so that's always been something that's important to me. And now with the boys, it's really really interesting because they're just under 20, both of them. And if you can imagine a boy in their late teens, they have some very specific ideas about what's going on.
Yeah.
And part of what's happening in the world right now is that you've got so much influence from like
Mhm.
doom scrolling, and you've got, you can go down, there's conspiracy theory people, and there's all these things happen. So both of the guys, they go down those rabbit holes, just like me, just like Jen. Um,
Mhm.
and it's important to remember that you need to go back to the critical thinking concept. So when we went down a rabbit hole with one of the boys about the concept that AI was actually using up all the world's energy, and we shouldn't use AI because it's so energy intensive, um, and
And it is.
he was very
Yeah.
adamant about
Yeah. It
um,
is.
this was a and you shouldn't use AI for anything.
Yeah.
And, we did some research with him, and we found out that the actual energy draw was about equivalent to using a cell phone. So when you're using it on a day-to-day basis, I think it does it does
Yeah.
use energy, but doesn't use as much as he thought.
Yeah.
He had this whole concept of he'd read or found this internet thing that said that we have about 13 years of water supply left in the world.
And he actually said it was the UN had said that we only have 13 years left of water.
Right. So
And so, yeah.
he was arguing the point
Yeah.
very passionate about this,
Yeah.
and just kept going back to
Love it.
the source. Where did this come from? What are they saying this? Where's the context for this? And so we went
Mhm.
back, we actually found the report, and he found out that it was a 13 years the study would end. That's what it
Yeah.
said. It wasn't what was reported in the second
Yeah.
hand, third hand. And so we really have to go back and particularly with people in this era because they're learning a lot by themselves. They're not learning like I had the luxury of sitting in a classroom with brilliant professors telling me, no, maybe you should consider this.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing, but we always have to go back and we get into these discussions because they can be fairly
Yeah.
um, directive
Yeah.
to go, okay, where did you find out this information and how valid is that source?
Yeah. And if I can just add in the interesting part that added to our conversation is when we went in, because you and I are plant-based whole grain diet for the most part. And, when we looked at it, I had suggested to him, perhaps, yes, AI is a drain, absolutely, but it's not going anywhere. Like it really isn't going anywhere. It's like saying, the development of the internet, it would have been better if we didn't have it. Well, it's not going anywhere. And so we did take, and I said, well, honey, have you considered that, the drain that meat consumption is? And so we looked, and we don't want to get into this whole topic, but what it actually led us to was statistical reports considering the source about all the drains on our environment, consumption of meat being one of the highest, agriculture being one of the highest, oil and gas being one of the highest. AI definitely plays into that for sure. But as you say, it's the critical thinking, and it's never been more important. We have to, at every stage of information that we bring into our orbit, which is by sliding through our phones, whatever we pick, we need to understand that the algorithms are matching what we look at, whether that is negative or positive, which is a whole other metaphor there on values. But we also have to dig deeper to be able to look at the real sources and to understand where the information is coming from, because we need to become conscious about the values that we're choosing instead of the world choosing it for us, instead of the internet choosing it for us, instead of social media choosing it for us, because it will give us whatever we inquire about. It'll give us more of that. So we
But
don't often go looking for good. And we
yeah,
got to go looking for good. We got to find the soulful way. We got to find talks like this. We got to find podcasts like this. We have to initiate them. We have to encourage them because our world is filled with a lot. And our child actually looked at this and thought this was the way of the world, which made him feel very heavy. And it doesn't mean that there aren't issues at play, but we need to consider the source. We need to see what's playing and we need to see it for the reality that it is. And then we need to turn the conversation around to who's doing it well? What can we learn? Where can we go next? How can we apply this in our own lives to make a difference, individually and collectively? Right?
and critical
Yeah,
thinking is important. I mean,
absolutely.
not the AI stuff. When you talk about UFOs, we know UFOs are true. They're real. They're just without any critical thinking, just accept that. I think I'm, I'm half kidding. Um, it's an instinct, but I think one of the things that targeted curiosity will yield to us, and what we're hoping the boys experience in university, is
Yeah.
that as the world changes, there are seismic changes happening in the world, they'll be prepared to do something as a valuable member of a
Mhm.
team, or as a valuable or as a valuable resource for other people, because they're critical thinkers. Because
Yeah,
you can teach skills on the job, but you can't teach curiosity. You can't
no,
teach thinking. So we just want to
right.
make forefront for the boys to always say, okay, what's consider the source? What's this about?
Absolutely. And then, we want to take this one step further because we're going over a little bit today. Hopefully, you guys can hang out a little bit longer, or if you're on the recording, you've skipped through the parts that speak to you. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about how we actively change this. So, we always want to come at the soulful way, and during the soulful sessions, we want to talk about what we can do. So, the first thing that this really is about is noticing. It's about noticing because what's happening now in the world is we have all these emotions. We talked about it earlier in the session about the busyness, the disconnect, the need to discern. Really, that starts with the noticing. It starts with what I talk about in Just One Soulful Thing. The book is about just this. It's about coming back to the moment, about noticing, and when we can become calmer, when we can pull ourselves back from the edge, right? Because it feels a lot of the time right now, particularly, that a lot of us are walking along what I call the razor's edge, and we're kind of teetering on that edge. We want to make a difference. We don't know what to do. We feel overwhelmed, exhausted. It's not that we don't care. It's that it's too much. It's all too much. And so we need to find ways to pull back from that edge so we don't plummet over. And when we pull back from the edge, we can then, what we talk about in the Mad Hero Project, is being able to put that cape on ourselves or help somebody else put it on so that we can soar into our lives, so we can make these conscious choices, that we can take our life to new levels. And so part of that is just the noticing. And then in relationship, it's about the asking. So we've done it with our boys. We do it with each other. We encourage you. I'm sure you do it in your own way, who's ever found their way to this particular talk. But this is perhaps a reminder that we ask ourselves, is this good for me? How do I feel? Where am I feeling it? As I look through my social media, as I engage in this conversation, how am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling it? Is my head pounding? Is my heart feeling tight? Is my stomach churning? How am I feeling? And then in this relationship element, we ask one another that. I notice you. I see you. I see that this is a lot for you. How are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? How can I help you? And what do you need? And so we've in having children, it's just an excuse to relearn life better. Really, when I became a mom, I just thought, great, I can learn all the things that I missed when I was younger, or we can encourage in our boys these things that we didn't do for ourselves or wasn't taught by our parents or whatever. We can just do it better. And along the lines, I think we learned a lot more, Todd, than even our kids did. We learned better about how to engage in relationship. And so with this, we ask ourselves and we ask one another and notice, how are you feeling? What do you need? Sometimes it's just, what do you need? Do you need space? Do you need a bath? Do you need me to draw you a bath? Do you need a back massage? Do you need a back tickle? With our boys, we would ask them, do you need a cup of tea? Do you need to go for a run? Do you need some food? Are you just hungry? Are you thirsty? These basic elements of what we're feeling can affect us every single day. And we're going to talk a lot more about this next week in our conversation around personal values and personal recognition and self-regulation. But in relationship, we can stop everything that's going on around us, pull back from the outside world and ask one another, what's happening for you right now? How can I help you? How can I support you? What are your values today? What is important to you? And how can I support you in that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time. Um, and thank you for sticking with us a little longer. It's hard to fit these double conversations and all the stories and things that we have, but we hope that you find this of value. Thank you to those that joined us kind of near the end. The recording actually is going to go out right after we're done here. I want to make sure that, I love Amit, the storytellers with us today too. Amit's doing some wonderful things in the world, drawing people into community. Amit, I hope you catch the recording of this because it's right up the alley of what you're doing. Amit launched a really cool campaign on Substack just this last week about encouraging people to give each other hugs. And so it was really fun because he sent out this message to everyone and said, okay, I just want you to I want you to read people's, their stories, their posts on Substack. I want you to give them a hug by restacking them and then tag me in it. And I said, I might not be able to keep up with that every day, but we're actually doing something on Substack called the SoulFull Collective. And so I'm going to be gathering from Substack the writings and initiatives of different people on Substack to then feature them in one particular newsletter so we can spread the word on good things happening. And then we're going to be doing some interviews. We're going to take one Sunday out of every month to interview someone that's doing some really cool things in the world and maybe a few people so that we can really spread the joy, spread what we can do together to be able to bring these values into play. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So there's some questions that I just want you to consider this week, and then we're going to close and we're going to just do a little bit of a centering exercise to send you off into your soulful, peaceful day. So the reflective questions are just, and whether you want to journal, I often encourage people that show up, even in the talks. I'm a note taker. So I like to take it when I do my workshops. They're interactive. And so you want to take what we're talking about and you want to put pen to paper in the traditional fashion to be able to write down things. And if you don't do it now, watch the recording, do it after. But I encourage you to solidify these concepts and ideas by writing them down because there's something magical that happens, and it's not magic, it's science, that it goes from your brain and what you're thinking to then the page that solidifies it and helps it shift from short-term fleeting thought to long-term strategy and soulful thinking and soulful creating. So considering these questions, what values feel most alive for me right now? So that's a big one, but I often say, don't overthink it. Let what comes to mind come. Which values feel like they would most enrich my relationships? So, how can we take those relationships in our lives to new levels? Where in my community do I feel called to show up? Whether that's, you know, um, saying more connective phrases in our community, pointing out something that's beautiful, talking to people as you walk, pausing and noticing, smiling at people, whatever that is, to being able to run campaigns to support wherever you can with the means that you have. How can I show up? What are the values that matter for me right now? And how do my values, really considering this, and we're going to talk more about this next week, but how do my values shape like how I listen, how I disagree, how I repair, how I heal, how I care about things? How are these values shifting for me? In my worker service, what would change if values led first? So that we always are reevaluating the work that we're doing in the world and really consciously calling out the values and how they lead us. And then what's one small, realistic way I can live my values this week? So without the overwhelm, without adding more to our plate, just shifting our attention from one thing to another. Maybe it's a little less time on your phone, a little more time with your family. Maybe it's a little less time at work and planning a date with your loved one. Maybe it's a little less time watching television and it's one more walk. with someone that you love and care about and someone that needs you, a friend that needs you right now, you know we have to come back to the idea that we have the answers within us. We don't always need to look outside of ourselves for what's important to us. We need to look within. We need to still long enough to trust and listen to that voice within and follow where it leads, because it never steers us wrong when it's from that place of love and kindness and connection. So with that, remembering that this isn't about perfection, it's just showing up, just one soulful thing at a time. So in the language that I use in Just One Soulful Thing, the book that poured forth from my soul, it's just about listening. It's just about asking. It's just about going within. It's just about trusting those answers. And then just beginning with just one soulful thing at a time in your life to shift towards the life that you truly desire and deserve consciously. Okay. So we're going to do a little centering exercise. You can just get comfortable wherever you are, set your things aside, feet on the ground, shoulders back, letting the weight of the world off your shoulders and just closing your eyes and coming into a place of centered calm. Dig, big, deep breaths. Dig deep, big, deep breaths. And then slowly letting it out through your mouth. And just feeling all the words, all the sensations, all the impressions, all the lessons that percolated up for you in the conversation. Where is that voice within you leading you next? Where is that whisper telling you to turn your attention? Think about the loved ones in your life. Think about the relationships that are needing healing or a little extra love this week. And just reminding ourselves, we're enough. We are enough. You'll know where to go. You'll know what to do. Just one soulful thing at a time. And then just a little bit of silence to allow a word or a phrase to bubble to the surface to guide you in the days ahead. And then carrying that with you, come back into the room. You can open your eyes with more clarity, with more purpose, with more soulful intention. Thank you for joining us today. Keep an eye out for the Soulful Way newsletter coming this week. The recording will hit your inbox today. For those of you that join us a little bit later, I'm actually, as soon as we're off this, I just say go for it and it'll shoot it into your inbox so you can look at the recording and find your way in the material. The Soulful Way newsletter coming out this week will focus on personal connection to values, how we cultivate that in our lives, and how we be able to spread that, build that foundation so that we can do this practically. So we'll touch on that. And then on Sunday, February 22nd, we will be doing a workshop. It'll be a 3-hour workshop. I hope you can make it. It's a deeper dive in. It's all of us in a room. It's us being able to share these thoughts. Normally, the workshops that I do are, they are quite expensive. I'll do half-day workshops on this or full-day workshops with companies or nonprofits on this. But I'm trying to bring more of this to the community because it's so important right now that where we put our attention is what we get more of. So we need to put our attention into things like this. So I hope you can join us. There will be more information in the newsletter that comes out to you. If you haven't subscribed, do. It's free. We're trying to offer as much of this as free as possible, with also the idea of fair exchange in some elements, because I want to encourage you to do that in your own lives. So it's finding that balance. So the newsletter comes out on about Thursday. And then you can join us next Sunday for free for our SoulFull Session, and that's at 10:30 Pacific. So we're really looking forward to engaging in that with you these next steps. And we're kind of testing this out to see if it works. If people are showing up week to week, if people are showing up for the workshops, we want to offer more of it. So we're just allowing, we're kind of just allowing this to unfold, and we're learning along the way. If you have suggestions or topics you want us to cover, please let us know. Todd, is there anything else you want to add on values and relationship and about today? Anything else you want to add, darling?
I value the community that we've developed here. That's what I value.
Absolutely. We do. We feel it growing. Not everybody can join us live on Sunday. And I think there's a couple of events on Sunday. Like there's the Olympics going on right now. There's football going on right now. I know there's a lot happening right now. So not everybody can join us live. That's perfectly fine. Whoever ends up here, but please spread the word. If this touched you, if it meant something to you, if you feel these conversations are important, please pass them along. We want to spread the word on good things too. So sending you lots of love. I'm going to give you some hearts, my beautiful people. Thank you for joining us for the SoulFull Sessions. I'm wishing you the most extraordinary, values-filled, soulful week you can imagine. Until next time, have a beautiful week, everybody. Mwah. See you next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.